the CEO of Diversity MBA. We're going to wait about 30 seconds, if that's okay, to see if we have more folks join us, and then we are going to get started. Please feel free to use the chat to ask any questions. And I love for you guys also to share, what cities you're in and what companies you're with. I will definitely, as you ask questions, definitely be able to take real-time insights from you. Real-time questions from you. So welcome to the DMBA, the Diversity MBA Media second annual publishing summit. This summit is really intended for us to be able to bring forward current authors that are coming out with new books on diversity, equity, and inclusion, of course, in leadership and on race relations. And this morning, I am focused on talking about in the diversity sections. So, hey, shout out to folks out of Florida and Chicago. Angela, great to see you support. So I actually have embarked on writing a series of 7 books based on 16 years of collecting research from our Inclusive Leadership Index. We basically, on an annual basis, we do the best places to work for women and managers of color. And so we are literally asking companies, large-scale companies, the questions around the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy and how it intersects with talent management. That is, and how it develops, retains, and advances talent, particularly women and people of color. So we really want to know not just the initiatives, but the impact of what organizations are doing. So so our index, just so you have a basis of where the information comes from, our index has about, on an average, 600 companies participating. And then as they participate, we have about 389 that qualified for ranking. And then from that, we do the scoring for the top 50 companies. And we have over 260 questions. The average size of our multinationals is about 35,000 employees and 27 billion. The average size of our regionals are about 5 to 6,000 employees and about 6 billion in revenue. So we're a big company survey, but companies with 100 employees or more absolutely can participate. So we have 7 categories that we actually measure. We look at strategy, we look at diversity, we look at recruitment, representation, board diversity, workplace inclusion and retention, accountability, succession planning, global inclusion as well. So the second book is the skinny on. So why the skinny on inclusion? It's really kind of, if you will, where it came from is I was thinking, well, I don't want to do a dummy series. Of course, we do have one of the author of the dummies here, Dr. Shirley, launching her book on the dummies and DEI, for DEI. Dummies for, was it DEI for dummies, I think. Okay, so we do know there's a need out there for that. However, I wanted to say, okay, let me bring to life the data that we're gathering as a resource guide in a format, a practical format that is really going to allow folks to be able to share. So this is the first book that I have with the Skinny on Diversity Recruiting. I now introduce to you the Skinny on Inclusion, our best practice trends and strategies on workplace inclusion and retention. And it's intended. What is it intended to be? It's intended to be a resource guide for everyone. I wanted you to be able to have at your fingertips the data and the metrics to measure inclusion, diversity, belonging, and anything you think you want it to do. So it's intended to be that guide for you that you can easily access and be able to gather any type of best practice data that you want in real time. So I believe we fill a market niche. While there are a ton, and I'm telling you, there's a lot of books out there on inclusion and equity, and now some folks are publishing on belonging, they really, there aren't really any books that are best practice driven. There's stories, which is great, but to really have data and metadata to back up and to provide you insights on decisions that you're making, I wanted to be able to do that with why inclusion and with the why an inclusion and retention guide, because I feel that clearly academic, you can go and gather information on and metrics, you know, from Google or any other data source, but I wanted to provide real-time access and information to you. And I found and learned that it's valuable because, you know, my first book, The Skinny on Diversity Recruiting, the best practice trends in recruitment and strategies, that folks are using that as a handheld guide. So best practices at your fingertips. We will share with you the best practices because I'm gathering. I have it. I have what organizations are doing. I have the data. So we're going to share what that is. And it'll be able to do a couple things. It's going to be able to validate what you need to know, as well as, you know, help you discover what more you should know. And that will allow you to be able to, you know, to more effectively change what's going on, maybe be able to help you have your case for why things need to be differently. But that's really part of what I want to do. I was thinking about, you know, what am I going to share that's different in the marketplace? One of the things that I found is that a lot of books aren't talking about, they are talking about individually what people think and feel about inclusion and belonging, but they're really not going into depth in terms of validating the insights and what they're gathering. So the other piece about the book that I know is helpful is that it's data driven. And so when I talk about metadata, gathering lots of information, lots of data from organizations about specific topics allows it to inform your decisions with information real time. And that's one of the things I really, really wanted to make sure happens, so that you can make the obvious choices and for yourself, and not so obvious for your leadership. And they're the ones that tend to want to make decisions. But the reality is too, in order to really think about predictive analytics, you know, projecting what you should do in the future, you do need to understand, because data tells the story. Sure, it tells the story on what you would like it to be, and you can spin it the way you want to, but this data that I'm presenting is the hard truth. We're telling the realities, and we are going to share the information and the insights around the hard truth of what's really happening with inclusion, belonging. You know, while companies, an example is, we can talk about, you know, 76% of companies have some type of courageous conversation platform or program going on in their organization. So they are learning how their employees feel. But the hard truth is, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about to activate and change that culture and behavior? And so I'm going to share that data with you. And then if you need to design, update, or recreate your plan, you will have the ability to do that. So, you know, so what's inside? And this might be where you guys want to ask a few questions to go a little deeper in what the book is about. So what's inside? So, you know, because I have these catchy titles. So what does that mean? Okay. So understanding the difference. Yes, this is all culture, right? And when you think about inclusion, belonging, you know, equality, it's all culture at the end of the day. Principles, you know, principles, beliefs, all of that is been there, and it's about the people. So I want to put the metrics behind that, you know, not just the metrics that you get from EEO1, the government, you get from the census, which are good trends, and good indicators to help you decide. But I want to be able to provide you real-time metrics on what folks are doing and the impact they're making around their culture. What are they actually doing to activate? So for example, what are some of the leading things that organizations are doing? They literally are creating strategies for white men. And I'm not mad at them for doing that. Why? Because they need to accelerate accelerate marginalizing the fear that they have as it relates to diversifying the workforce and creating inclusion and access for everybody else to be able to have the same opportunities they have. So yeah, and so the numbers I have out there are real numbers, and it is the hard truth because I'm going to share, what the obstacles are around it. So and so when you think about, well, what is the obstacle that exists around culture? Well, folks are celebrating engagement surveys as a win. Oh my goodness, of 100%, we got 95% satisfaction. Well, and if 90% of your workforce is white American, okay, kudos, the white folks are happy. But how about that 5%? You need to look at the 5% that really understand what's happening in your culture, where people may have managers that really don't believe in the change process for being a true inclusive environment for everyone. And so the other thing is also, I'm just going to put it out there unapologetically, because I kind of get to do that. So is that you talk about middle managers, that's homogenous, the white male and some of the white females, but more so the white male in the middle management roles that are in plant environments or field environments, branch environments that create subcultures a little different from your headquarter culture, and you're calling them the frozen middle, the tough middle. For me, that's an excuse. And I say and tell you why in the book, because when organizations choose how they are going to drive change in their culture, it does happen in a pyramid, right? If we go back and look at fundamental change management, or OE, organizational effectiveness and change management, been around, right, 40 years, you are going to have people that move through that continuum. Some are going to get it, some are not going to get it, some is going to take longer to get it. And that's really what's happening in the middle. It's about retooling them. So we go a little deep with the data to provide you. I've read about 15 books on inclusion, and a lot of them at the end of the day are telling me kind of the same thing. So it was important for me to be able to help you understand what you can leverage and what metrics you can align to your strategies so that you know what changes you needed to make. So our next section, and I talk about creating sustainable engagement, what people want. So we actually, in addition to our organizational index, we do a lot of focus groups to understand as well what the organization information is being told to us, what's actually happening. So, we ask people, so creating a sustainable engagement, particularly in the remote environment. We do have a chapter dedicate how to do that in a remote environment, what organizations are doing from a best practice standpoint to do that. I think that, when we talk about there's leadership at the C-suite saying, yes, we're committed to this, but what does that really look like? And what does that really mean? When you talked about investing resources and time. So we also ask, what do you want? What do people want to see? And for the most part, people want to see, they want to know that what they share and what they believe, something's being done about it. They want it to be shown up in advancement. They want to see what those opportunities are. They want to see, they want to know that a manager that doesn't get it is either going to get training or, get released back to industry. They want to know they truly are in an organization that pays attention. So, we do generational viewing. We look at what the different generations want, because different, believe it or not, there's 7 generations of the workforce, and different groups want different things. And so we share some of those trends. We share, not just the current state of best practices and leading practices, or just practices and what people are doing. We think it's important to do that. But here, once again, we have the metric behind it. We have the metrics and the impact and the actual things that companies are doing. Not totally embedded in just storytelling, which is great. And that's what a lot of books out there are doing. So I don't want to redo the storytelling process. I really want to be able to, to kind of give you the practical information that's going to help you. And I'm learning, I've learned from my first book how much to give and what more to give, but it's so much data driven. People are saying, oh, you don't need to do anything different, but I do know there's some things I need to do better. So I'm understanding that. Any questions? I'll pause and see any questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask? Okay, just feel free. You can ask them anytime. So then, I really get into what's happening with retention and churn. And I do mean I'm breaking it down. So, and what I mean by that, companies, the reality is organizations celebrate a retention if it's, 80% or better, and they should. But for the most part, they're looking at overall retention. But when you look at retention, we ask organizations, we want to see it by ethnicity, by identity, by generation. You do have to look at retention that way. We know that retention, for the most part, is a key performance indicator, but it's the top key performance indicator in how well you're doing in creating an inclusive culture or institutionalizing a culture of inclusion. And we also know that representation is the other leading metric in doing that. So when we feel and think about retention as a KPI, as an indicator, and we're measuring it and looking at it at all groups. And a lot of companies don't. They use the lag indicator report from EEO1 because they have to report in if they're federal contractors. They don't do the necessarily dive that they need to do, because when you look at what's happening by group, and clearly there's some numbers that are small, Native American numbers are small, but when you look at what's happening by group, and identity and then generation, you start to ask your questions, what's happening in the culture here? Clearly there's natural attrition, and so that's what you expect. But then we look to understand what's really happening in the culture, and you can align those numbers to what's happening with your programs and your initiatives that you're driving, and be able to make some real-time decisions. So that's kind of what we feel is important here. For churn, we've been asking companies, what's happening in the first 3 to 5 years of your new employees, really the first 3 years. If you find that you have a high turnover ratio in your new hires, right now there's something happening at the team level, at the management level. So we want to bring data in there. We find that quite a few companies don't really look at churn other than as a turnover indicator. They don't look at it in the deep dive to go behind it. So we're encouraging them. I'm encouraging them to, take the time and do the analytical work and assess what's happening with the change within that place. So equity in the workplace. This chapter, I will say, is really going to be honed in a lot of what the practices are, and not so much what leading practices are, because a lot of companies are doing a lot of different things right now, both in the North America as well as globally. They're trying to decide, what is equity versus equality anyway? What does that look like? What does that mean? And what do we need to do? And at the end of the day, equity is a huge investment if you're truly going to do it for your entire organization. And really look at, if it's compensation bias, if it's, we know the highest level of inequities exists in employee performance review processes. So we'll be sharing like a lot of that and what companies are doing to try to identify it, what some companies are doing to try to mitigate it. But for the most part, this is a journey and it's a continuum. But I think it's important for folks to say, okay, where are we in our journey here? We're trying to have an equitable workforce. Most companies, majority of them are starting at pay equity. Where are we and what do we need to do to ensure that we are having a more equitable culture, and what do we have to do to accelerate it? I will say this to you, for example, we ask companies about compensation bias, and a lot of them ask, so what is that? What does that mean? I was like, what are you doing to monitor it, to mitigate it, to marginalize it? What are you doing? And a lot of them like, well, you know, we got committees and task force kind of looking at some things, but really haven't really made any effective change. Very few companies have. So there's just quite a bit of practices that are going in place. And I think just sharing what organizations are doing, what it means around defining it within the culture, how it's supposed to be integrated within the culture, and then performance management is really what we're talking about there. So then I really spend time, so I'll step back here. Then implementing the best practice plan, I'm going to come back to that. I actually launch, and I'm continuing to launch the second and third phase of our marketplace survey. So we went to chief diversity officers, about 750, to ask them to define what belonging means to them and what inclusion means to them. And then we are going to actually a younger generational population, and then we may do a small segment of the overall marketplace. But the insights here, my intent on this particular section in the book was to give you guys, give the readers a sense of something different, where so many organizations are talking about, this is what belonging means to us. We're adding, you know, inclusion here. We want to add the B to IEDB, to DEIB, to IEB. You know, the acronyms are all over the place now, and it's whatever is sexy to do. But I really want folks to get a sense and define, what does belonging mean and feel like to me? And the same thing on the inclusion side, and be able to have conversations about it. Because really just adding it, you know, adding the B to what you're already doing, to me is, you know, it doesn't mean much unless you socialize it in your culture. So if it's socialized based on the practices that you've done and the initiative that you've driven with impact, results that change, then people says, oh, okay, this is the evolution. This is the next place we should be. This does make sense for us to do that. So I really felt that it was necessary to give a different lens and view on what's happening with the notion of belonging and inclusion, so that you can prepare your own idea and concept about it. And then implementing the best practice plan, which is a section that is going to be in every book that I do. We bring forward the scorecards, the tools. We actually created some of the tools that we have for organizations to be able to make sure you're using them and cascading them down, so that you could build a best practice plan based on the best practice you get. So these are the sections that you're seeing here. Within each of these sections, there's 4 to 5 chapters, and within the chapters there are best practices for every component of the chapter. So the book, you'll have probably 100 best practices, if not more, maybe more, that you can literally go back and say, okay, these are the best practices. So when we think about, let me just step back and say, so what is the best practice? So when you think about practices, we gather information to see what you're doing. So what you're doing is the practice. Is it the minimum requirements that establish the practice? What is it that you do? The practice is just that, it's the practice. And then the best practice is that activity that you do repeatedly that fosters the desired results and outcomes that you want. And so that you're able to do and implement with minor changes over and over again and yield the kind of results that you want. So then you're able to in across discipline, across industries, to implement your basics of best practices. And then the companies that decide to create something different and new that doesn't exist could become an emerging practice and later become a leading practice. Once they say, we've actually seen the effectiveness of this new way of doing things. Some people call it the next practice. What you have, we call it leading practices, because we know once more organizations understand that this practice is not, just new or something different to do, it literally is accelerating and driving results. So like, for example, one of the leading practices in courageous conversations is once an organization goes through their cycle of courageous conversations, then they do polling, and they do quarterly polling so that they can check the pulse of how folks are navigating what they've learned in the culture. And then they take a couple of the initiatives from what they've heard, and they immediately implement those changes and behaviors to what people say, for me to be successful here, I really need to, have folks appreciate the inequities of bias, that exists. And so it's leading because companies are gathering data, they're analyzing the data, and they're executing and implementing on the change in that same cycle, that same year. Most organizations don't do it. Only those that feel that they have to accelerate what they need to do from a performance side. And that's very real. And if you're gathering this information, you have to act on it. And that's part of this whole notion of having all the data, being so overwhelmed with the information, but what do I do with it? So we talk about setting the priorities too. What are our priorities? What are we already doing? Leveraging your existing tools that you have already, and then be able to just enhance them, right? Being able to use teams differently. How do we shift employee resource groups to now help drive, not just inform the culture of cultural differences, but to really drive the change? How do we help, white males who have access and be more comfortable with being able to accelerate not just small groups of people of color and different identities, but large groups like they've been able to do with white women. And then also getting white women to be more advocates in a way that they can bring more women along with them, as well as other people of color. But looking at all these different things and sharing these things that we've gathered, although we've been doing it for 16 years, I'm more interested in the stuff that organizations are doing in the last 3 years, because that's relevant in today's culture. So that's what we're doing. And then we always provide a resource index for you to have access to. I'll have a lot of books and other things to look at, and tools and things like that. So that's what we will do. So that's pretty much what's in and what's to come in our next book. So in my next book, so how do you gain access to it? I'm so excited. So we have an email that'll be on our website, Diversity MBA, diversitymagazine.com, but it's also on Pamela A. McElvane, here's my name here, .com, with no space in between, that we are going to give free ebook copies. The first 500 that sign up will get a free ebook copy. And then on Amazon is it will be available on Amazon. And then the Skinny on Diversity Recruiting is already there. And oh, there's the email right there where the Skinny on Diversity Recruiting is. It's there where you have the ability to gather the information. But the whole idea is to give you yet another best practice guide so that you can have, you know, access at your fingertips. That's the whole idea of this. This will start doing, you know, the launch parties and all of that stuff in the first quarter of next year, to be able to invite you to come and be a part of it. So that is, you know, really, oh, I think it said 100 ebooks. I think it's 1,000. Oh, our first 1,000 free ebooks. Okay. So sign up, so make a note to sign up December 1st, and it's 1,000 ebooks. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, we've sold over, they told me we weren't going to be able to sell a lot of our diversity recruiting books. And actually we've sold close to 8,000 in our first year. 8 to 10,000. So that's exciting. And to know that teams can use them in teams. And one of the things that's important is I like having group conversations about this, but to be able to give you a book that's data driven and data supported is my intent for this. This is the goal, you know, that I have for you. So if there, I don't see any questions in the chat or comments. If any of you have any questions or comments. No, other than that, then I want to say thank you. Make a note, Pamela@McElvane.com, and know that our book will be available December 1 for your first ebook, and to sign up for the ebook, and then the hard copies will be available. So thank you guys for attending. I might have ended a couple minutes early. If so, you can go check out the others. But thank you. I appreciate your joining. Oh.